Joining us now, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor. He also serves on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. He has a new book out this month called Uncontrolled Spread, Why COVID-19 Crushed Us and How We Can Defeat the Next Pandemic. Scott, I have some, as often I do, some theoretical questions. So these breakthroughs that we're seeing with people that are vaccinated, I attributed it to perhaps people that were not as, not young. Maybe their immune systems weren't as good as a young person. But how do you explain breakthrough cases in young people with really strong immune systems? And does that mean that the variant is getting around the vaccine because it's a little bit different than the original one the vaccine was designed for? And then why do a booster that may not be as specific to the Delta variant? Why not do a new one? Why not look at what the variant, how it's different, and design a booster that would be better? Because I can't figure out where these breakthroughs are coming from.
Yeah, generally we're seeing the breakthroughs among people who are older and who are vaccinated a longer interval ago. So when you look at the actual totality of the data, and look, there are reports of breakthroughs across the spectrum, including in younger people. But when you look at the data that's been made available publicly out of the UK and out of Israel, the two countries that are collecting this data systematically, because CDC is not, generally the breakthroughs do break down by time and age. So you're seeing it more pronounced in older individuals who were vaccinated a while ago. That doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions. What we think's happening is that Delta creates such high viral loads early in the course of the illness that if you have declining levels of circulating antibodies, it can overwhelm your initial defenses. It can overwhelm those circulating antibodies. You get infected, and then you're dependent upon secondary immune cells, you and I have talked about, like memory B cells and T cells, to kick in to then fight that infection to prevent you from getting sick from the infection. But it takes a couple of days for those secondary immune cells to kick in. So in the meantime, you've been infected. You might be developing mild symptoms. Eventually, those immune cells will kick in, and those cells will prevent you from developing severe disease, from being hospitalized. But you'll qualify as someone who's become infected with COVID at that point. So this is really the debate among the public health crowd, because what they say is maybe we don't need boosters because the vaccines are still doing their job in terms of protecting people from getting hospitalized and developing severe disease. The premise never was that they were going to prevent all infections. We just took for granted that the early data showed that the vaccines were very effective at preventing infections. But I think that the reality is, and the concern is, that if you see rising infections among people, particularly among more vulnerable people, eventually that's going to start to translate into worsening outcomes among those individuals. And that's the argument for boosters.
Well, and if you can, if vaccinated people can give it to one another, then you finally find someone who's unvaccinated who doesn't have the worst case scenario taken off the table. So, that's not a good outcome. You also, we were not on camera, but you updated me on another study in this case that showed that that vaccine immunity was at least as good or maybe better than natural immunity. So you've got one study that seemed to indicate something else, and another one that seems to indicate what you've said all along, was that isolating the spike protein might give you an even more robust immune response than natural immunity.
Right. This was a study out of the UK. It was actually well done. It was a better constructed study than the Israeli study that seemed to suggest that natural immunity was more robust than vaccine-induced immunity, because the study out of the UK was a prospective study. They followed people prospectively, and it showed the opposite. I don't think that we should draw any single conclusion from any one of these studies. I don't present the study as sort of a dueling study to say one's right, one's wrong. I think on the balance, it's unclear whether vaccine-induced immunity is better, slightly worse than vaccine-induced immunity. The reality is vaccine-induced immunity can be redosed, so immunity is going to decline over time in both individuals. So you can redose a vaccine. You don't want to redose an infection. And to acquire a infection-induced immunity, you have to actually get the infection, which is something that we want people to try to actively avoid. So getting a vaccine has a lot of elegant attributes in that regard. But I do think that these studies lead to a different conclusion, which is that the immunity conferred by natural infection seems to be robust and seems to be durable. We know it lasts at least 6 months, probably longer. We don't know how the severity of the infection you get correlates with the robustness of the immunity that you're going to acquire. With SARS and MERS, we saw that people who got more sick ended up having more durable immunity. We don't know if that's the case with this SARS-CoV-2 virus, but it might be. So we don't understand a lot about the how long the immunity is going to last with respect to people who get infected. My hunch is it's not going to last in perpetuity. At some point, those individuals will need to be vaccinated. But it certainly lasts a period of time. And in Israel, in fact, with their green pass, in order to qualify to get a green pass, you have to demonstrate that you've been vaccinated. But you could also demonstrate that you've been recently infected, because they're recognizing that there's a period of immunity that's quite robust after infection that confers equivalent protection to vaccination, or semi-equivalent protection to vaccination, that it should be recognized for those policy purposes. Now, again, they have the equivalent of a vaccine passport or an immunity passport in Israel, which is something that I think a lot of people who are proponents of acquiring immunity naturally and foregoing vaccinations would probably be against. So I'm not sure how we'd account for that, but there are a sizable number of people, as you know, arguing that we should be recognizing acquired immunity.